Hello and welcome to another of our Stockport Homes Skills for Life specific skills sessions. Today we are looking at problem solving. Problems. We all have problems, don't we? And our ability to solve our problems has a big effect on our lives and in turn how much stress and anxiety we have to go through. That's why it's important that we use a problem-solving strategy, which is simply a way of getting the best possible outcomes that we can aim for. So I'm going to show you now 7 steps to solving problems that I've used in cognitive work in the past, and at the end of the video I'm going to show you some shorter, simpler versions that are probably easier to remember and use on a day-to-day basis, but it's important we get the background information. So I'm going to go through 7 steps, starting with step 1, define the problem. Now what that means is it's important for us to understand what's causing the problem. It might be obvious, but often it's a bit more complicated and less so. So for example, let's say I've got a stain on the wallpaper on my wall. Now, I haven't actually got any wallpaper, but just pretend. Let's say I've got a stain on the wallpaper, so I might say the problem is the wallpaper, and I replace the wallpaper, and then it comes back, the stain, a couple of weeks later. And then I find when I look behind the wallpaper that there's damp on the wall, so I might paint it with damp-proof paint. And then a couple of months later, the stain comes back, and I find that the plaster and brickwork's wet behind it. And when I go outside the building, I discover the guttering's broken, and it's pouring water onto the wall. The root cause of that problem is the guttering, not the wall, not the plaster, not the wallpaper. It's the guttering. And unless I solve the root cause of it, I'm never going to get the problem properly solved. If you think of it in first aid terms, we need to treat the injury, not just the symptoms. If I break my leg, I have to fix the leg, not just take painkillers so it doesn't hurt anymore. So step 1 is define the problem. Identify the root cause, what's behind everything, what's fueling it. You have to do that before we can move forward. Now the way we used to do it in cognitive terms is you define a problem by you dividing it into 2 things. It's where you are now versus where you want to be. And it's the gap. If there's a gap between those 2 things, then there's a problem. If where you are now is you've got toothache and you're in pain, but where you want to be is pain-free, there's a difference, and that's why there's a problem. Whatever gets you to where you want to be, that's your solution. So step 1, define the problem. Step 2, stop and think. Often when we're confronted with a problem, we have a tendency to dive right in. Okay, that may not necessarily be the best approach. For the problem-solving strategy to work, we have to think things through. We have to give our brains time to make sense of things and come up with an answer. If we just dive straight in, then we're often acting on what's called impulse, which is an emotional response rather than a rational or logical response. So just stop and think through what you're about to do. Go through the following steps I'm going to show you. If anyone does any scuba diving, they have a great system for if something goes wrong, which is stop, breathe, think, act. Okay, because they've recognized one of the biggest cause of issues and problems in scuba diving is people panicking. So the first 2 steps are stop whatever you're doing, breathe, just breathe. Control your breathing, get a grip of your emotions, then think through what you're going to do, and then do it. Don't panic. Don't just dive straight in, okay? Stop and think. Step 3, gather information. Okay, it's important before we do anything to try and understand what's going on. And what we don't want to do is take one small piece of information and then charge off in the wrong direction, creating more problems to solve rather than creating any solutions. So before we try and fix anything, we start looking at what's going on. We ask questions. We try and see the background to things, what we call the objective big picture, as practically as possible in the time we've got. Just try and understand everything you can that's going on. before you try and come up with any solutions. That's important. We'll move to that in the next step, which is step 4. Generate possible solutions. You'll notice I said solutions there, plural, rather than solution, singular, because it's important you try and come up with more than one. If you only come up with one solution, the tendency is we tend to go for what we've always done, what we did last time, the usual one-size-fits-all solution, and that may not be the best fit for this problem right now. So get creative. Force yourself to come up with 4, 5, 6, maybe even 10 possible solutions. You'll have some really good strong ones, you'll have some so-so ones, and you'll have some completely out there wacky blue sky thinking ones. But by coming up with the process of thinking of several possible solutions, it'll spark your creative juices flowing. You'll come up with new ideas, especially if you're doing this with other people. As one idea will spark off another idea and spark off another idea. You've got a real possibility here of coming up with a new, original, bespoke solution that fits this problem much better than just what you do every time and what you've done always in the past. Okay? Push yourself. Try and come up with as many as you can before you do anything. Step 5. Consider the consequences. So we've thought through our problem. We've come up with lots of different ideas for solutions, and then potentially we've picked one. Okay? Once we've got a solution, what we then need to do before we put it into action is think about, if we did this, what would happen? Not just in the short term, but in the long term. Some ideas can seem really attractive in the immediate and the short term. In other words, I'm just going to do this and it's dealt with. And you might be right in the short term, but when we look at things days, weeks, months, years down the line, does it still stand that that was a good idea, or is it going to create more problems for us as we go along? Some other solutions long term might be better, but in the short term a bit more painful. What we're trying to avoid here is the thing of just doing the easiest solution in the short term and just create more problems for ourselves. You know, we talked about the wallpapering. Changing the wallpaper is probably the quickest thing to do, but obviously in the long term it doesn't solve anything. So think about the consequences of your possible solution. You could even do what's called a cost-benefit analysis, where you weigh up the pros and cons, short term to long term, and see which one outweighs the other. You don't necessarily have to do that. Just think it through. Just think through, if I do this, what will happen? Step 6, planning. We plan how we're going to put our solution into practice. It may be fairly straightforward, or it may need a bit of thought. And the simplest way to do that is just to think about, okay, who needs to be involved, where are we going to do this, when are we going to do it, and what exactly are we going to do? If you can come up with answers to those questions, you've usually got a rough plan that will suffice for most problems. Step 7, our final step of our 7-step problem-solving strategy is action. And it's a bit of a cheat, this. It's really 2 parts to it. Firstly, it's action. Put your solution into action. Do something. Actually try it. And the second part of that action really is, did it work? Now, it's important we ask that question. And it's important we try and understand the answer. Now, if it didn't work, then hopefully we'll have a better understanding of the problem. You know, it's okay, that didn't work, but now I see why it didn't work. If we can understand, sometimes we can learn a lot from failures, why something didn't work. And if in step 4 you generated several possible solutions, you should have a possible plan B, plan C, plan D. You can go back to there and pick up your next solution with a bit more understanding and try something else. If it did work, that's great, but also then it's quite good that we try and understand why, because then we've got more knowledge if this or something similar happens again in the future. Okay, so step 7 is action, and that incorporates try your solution. Did it work? If it didn't, go back to step 4 and pick another solution. If it did, just try and understand why did it. Just try and develop your knowledge so you're stronger for the next time. So there you have it, a 7-step problem solving strategy. But you may find that that's a little bit too complicated for you to use on a daily basis. So I'm going to show you 2 different variations on that where it's been simplified a little bit. There is a system that the police used to use called SARA, and SARA stands for Scan, Analyse, Respond and Assess. Now the scan just means look at the problem and work out what's going on. Analyse is try and work out what the causes are of that problem. Respond is obviously do something, put a solution into practice, and assess is did it work, and try and understand how did it work, or if it didn't work, what can we do to fix it. Okay, that's nice and simple. The one I particularly like though, and the one I promote, is a 4-step problem solving strategy which goes like this. Number 1, identify the problem. Number 2, identify the causes of the problem. So we're going for that problem definition again. Step 3 is do something to tackle the causes of the problem. So we're going for those root causes again. And step 4 is did it work? If it did, great, and try and understand it a bit more. If it didn't, why didn't it work, and what else could we try in that situation? So 1, identify the problem. 2, identify the causes of the problem. 3, do something to tackle the causes of the problem. And 4, did it work? Okay. Hopefully they're a little bit simpler, something you could use on a day-to-day basis. We don't want people walking around with flip charts or anything, trying to work everything out in detail. It's going to be something you can do quickly. The key thing with most of these is that step 2 that I told you about on the 7 steps, stop and think. You've got to stop, breathe, think and act before you do anything, because if your emotions take control, none of this is going to help you. You've got to have that impulse control that you can go, okay, let's just pause a second and think this through. But if you can do that, the world's your oyster, my son. Okay, or daughter, whoever's watching. Okay, I don't want to offend anyone. But anyway, until next time, take care of yourselves, stay safe.